The morning after the fire, the village was in an uproar. People gathered in small groups, whispering and pointing at the charred remains of Emeka's old house. Adana kept her children close, wary of the tension in the air. Nkechi returned from her trip to send Adana's message, her face etched with worry. The whole city is talking about the fire. She said, people are asking questions. By midday, a police car arrived from the nearest town. Two officers stepped out, their presence causing a stir among the villagers. They headed straight for Uche and Obiора's compound. Adana watched from a distance, her heart pounding. She saw the brothers emerge, gesturing widely as they spoke to the officers. After what seemed like hours, the police left, but not before giving Uche and Obiora stern looks. As night fell, Nnamdi arrived unexpectedly. He looked tired but determined. Odono, he said, things are moving faster than we expected. The fire has raised suspicions. We need to act now. He explained that the lawyer, Mrs. Okafor, had petitioned the court to move up the hearing date. But we need more evidence. He added, is there anyone else who might know something about your husband's death? Adana thought hard. Suddenly, she remembered something. There was a hunter, she said, Okori. He used to go into the bush early every morning. He moved away shortly after Emeka died. Nnamdi's eyes lit up. Do you know where he went? Adana shook her head. But Nkechi, who had been listening, spoke up. I think he went to his sister's place about a day journey from here. The next morning, Nnamdi set out to find Okori. Adana returned to her daily routine, but with a new sense of hope. Days passed. The village remained tense. Uche and Obiora were rarely seen, but when they did appear, they looked nervous and agitated. A week later, Nnamdi returned with news that made Adana's knees weak. We found Okori, he said, and he saw everything. He was in the bush the day your husband died. He saw Uche and Obiora attack Emeka. Adana gasped. Why didn't he say anything before? Nnamdi's face darkened. They threatened him, but now he's ready to testify. The next few days were a whirlwind. Mrs. Okafor arrived from the city with a team of lawyers. The police returned, this time with more officers and the warrants. Uche and Obiora were arrested, protesting their innocence even as they were led away. The village watched in shocked silence. As word spread, more people came forward with information. You could imagine a servant who had overheard the brothers plotting, and also a farmer who had seen them return from the bush covered in blood on the day of Emeka's death. The court date arrived sooner than expected. Adanna found herself in a large, intimidating courtroom in the city. Her children, Chidre and Amaka, sat behind her, their eyes wide with wonder and fear. The trial lasted for days. Witnesses were called. Evidence was presented. Uche and Obiara's lawyer tried to discredit Adanna, painting her as a greedy widow. But Mrs. Okafor was skillful enough, unraveling their lies one by one. Finally, it was Okoria's turn to testify. The old hunter's voice shook as he recounted what he had seen that fateful day. Adanna could see the color drain from Uche and Obiara's faces as he spoke. After what seemed like an eternity, the judge was ready to give his verdict. Now the courtroom fell silent. In the beginning of the overwhelming evidence, the judge began. This court finds Uche and Obiora guilty of the murder of their beloved brother, Emeka. A collective gasp filled the room. Adanna felt tears streaming down her face. She couldn't control it. The judge continued. Furthermore, all properties belonging to the deceased are to be immediately returned to his widow, Adanna, and her children. Cheers erupted in the courtroom. Chidi and Amaka hugged their mother tightly with tears rolling down their cheek. Nnamdi and Mrs. Okafor beamed with pride. As Uche and Obiara were led away in handcuffs, Adanna felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She has done it. She had won justice for Emeka and secured a future for their children. Now outside the courtroom, surrounded by well-wishers, Adanna looked up at the sky. We did it. Emeka, she whispered, we did it. But even as she celebrated this victory, Adanna knew that her journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead as she reclaimed Emeka's properties and rebuilt their life. But for the first time in her years, she faced the future not with fear, but with hope. The journey back to the village was filled with mixed emotions for Adanna and her children. Joy at their victory was tempered, but uncertainty about what awaited them at home. As their bus approached the village, Adanna saw a crowd gathered at the entrance. For a moment, fear gripped her heart, but as they got closer, she realized the villagers were there to welcome them. The old man Ezekiel stood up, tears in his eyes. Adanna, he said, we are sorry for doubting you. You have brought honor to our village by standing up for justice. Nkechi pushed through the crowd and hugged Adanna tightly. Welcome home, my sister, she said. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. With the help of Nnamdi and Mrs. Okafor, Adanna began the process of reclaiming Emeka's properties. There was paperwork to be filled, meetings to attend, and decisions to be made. The house in the city which Uche and Obiara had tried to sell needed repairs. and Adana decided to rent it out so that it could provide a steady income for herself and her family. It was a wise decision. In the village, Emeka's lands were returned to her. Some villagers who had been farming these lands approached Adana nervously. They were unsure of their fate or the reply Adana was to give them. But Adana surprised them all. She said, "Continue farming, but do you know what you will do? We will share the harvest equally and fairly." Her decision earned her respect and gratitude from many people in the village. As life began to settle in a new rhythm, Adana focused on her children's education. With their improved financial situation, she could now afford to send both Chidi and Amaka to a good school in the nearby town. One evening, as they sat in their new home, Emeka's old house which they had reclaimed and renovated, Chidi asked a question that has been on his mind. "Mama," he said, "now that we have all this, are we rich?" Adana smiled and pulled her children close. "We are rich in many ways, my children. We have a roof over our heads, food on our table, and opportunities for a good future. But our greatest wealth is our love for each other and the memory of your father." Amaka looked up at her mother with wide eyes. "Tell us about Papa again," she said. And so Adana began to tell stories of Emeka, his kindness, his hard work, his dreams for his family. But this time, the stories were not tinged with sadness and loss. Instead, they were celebrations of a life well lived and a legacy preserved. As the months passed, Adana became known in the village not just as the widow who fought for justice, but as a fair and kind landlady. She used some of her new wealth to help other widows in the village, remembering her own struggles. She also started a small business selling palm oil, which she processed from the palm trees on her farmlands. Many villagers found employment in this venture, further endearing Adana to the community. But life wasn't without its challenges. Some people, loyal to Uche and Obiora, still viewed Adana with suspicion. There were occasional threats and attempts to damage her property, but with the support of her friends and the protection of the local authorities, Adana stood firm. One day, a letter arrived from the prison where Uche and Obiora were serving their sentences. They were requesting a visit from Adana. She was unsure about the meeting, but after much thought, she decided to go. The visit was tense and emotional. Uche and Obiora had aged considerably in prison. They asked for forgiveness, claiming they had seen the error of their ways. Adana listened slightly. When they finished, she spoke softly but firmly. "I cannot forget what you did to Emeka, to me, to my children, but I will pray for your souls." As she left the prison, Adana felt a sense of closure. She had faced her husband's killer, not with hatred, but with dignity and strength. Back in the village, life continued to improve for Adana and her children. Chidi excelled in his studies, dreaming of becoming a lawyer like Mrs. Okafor, Amaka showed it for business, often helping her mother with the palm oil trade. Many came to hear her advice and inspiration. On the 10th anniversary of the court's verdict, the village held a celebration in Emeka's memory. As Adanna stood before the gathering, her now grown children beside her, she reflected on her journey. 10 years ago, I was a widow with nothing but my faith and love for my children, she said. Today I stand before you, not just as a woman who reclaimed what was rightfully hers, but as a member of this community who has learned the true meaning of justice, forgiveness, and perseverance. The crowd cheered, and as Adanna looked out at the faces of her friends and neighbors, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had not only survived, she had thrived, and in doing so, she had honored Emeka's memory in the best way possible by creating a legacy of love, strength, and justice that could live on through generations. As the years rolled by, Adanna's influence in the village and beyond continued to grow. Her palm oil business had expanded, providing employment to many in the region. But more than her financial success, it was her wisdom and compassion that drew people to her. Chidi, now a successful lawyer in the city, often returned to the village to provide free legal advice to those in need. Amaka had taken over the management of the family's properties and was known for her fair business practices. One day, as Adanna sat on the porch of her home, grey now streaking her hair, a young woman approached her. The woman introduced herself as Nneka, the daughter of one of the farmers who worked Adanna's land. Mama Adanna, Nneka said, her voice trembling with emotion. I've come to thank you. The scholarship you provided had allowed me to finish my studies. I'm now a teacher. Adanna smiled warmly, remembering the bright-eyed girl who had come to her years ago, desperate for a chance at education. You've worked hard, Nneka. Your success is your own. Nneka shook her head. But without your help, I wouldn't have had the opportunity. You've changed my life. You've changed not just my life, but the lives of so many in our village. As Nneka left, Adanna reflected on how much she had changed. The village that had once turned its back on her in her time of need was now a thriving community with better schools, a small clinic, and opportunities for young people. Later that evening, as Adanna prepared for her bed, she heard a commotion outside. She opened her door to find a group of villagers led by the old man, Ezekiel's grandson, looking worried. Mama Adanna, the young man said, there is trouble. A big company wants to buy all the land in our village to build a factory. Many are tempted by their offers, but we are afraid we'll lose our homes and farms. Adanna listened carefully. This was a new challenge, one that threatened the very fabric of their community. Call a meeting, she said. We'll face this together. The next day, the village gathered under the old Iroko tree. Adana stood before them, her presence commanding respect. "My people," she began, "we faced many challenges together. This is just another. We cannot let greed destroy what we've built. Our land is not just soil and crops. It's our heritage. It's our future." He proposed a plan, pooling their resources to start their own small factories, processing their farm produce, creating jobs without losing their land. It would be a hard work, she warned, but it would be theirs. The villagers listened. They also asked questions, and they finally agreed. Over the next few years, with Adana's guidance and Amaka's business acumen, the village transformed. Small processing plants sprung up, owned and operated by the villagers themselves. The big company's offer was politely but firmly declined. As Adana entered her twilight years, she found joy in watching the fruits of her labor. The village had become a model of sustainable development, attracting visitors from far and wide who wanted to learn from their success. One warm evening, as she sat surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Chidi asked her a question. "Mama," he said, "looking back at everything you've been through, what do you think Papa would say if he would see you now?" Adana's eyes misted over as she looked at the faces around her, faces full of love, respect, and the promise of a bright future. "Your father," she said softly, "would be proud, not just of what we've achieved, but how we achieved it. We faced justice with justice, hatred with love, and greed with generosity." She paused, her gaze drifting to the framed photo of Emeka on the wall. "But most of all," she continued, "he would be happy to see that his dream lives on. The dream of a family and a community bound together by love and mutual respect." As the sun set on another day, Adana felt a deep sense of contentment. The journey had been long and often difficult, but it had been worthwhile. From the depths of despair, she had reason to create a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. In the end, Adana realized it wasn't about the properties or the wealth, it was about the lives touched, the community transformed, and the values passed on to future generations. That was the true victory, a victory of a human spirit over adversity. As darkness fell and her family began to disperse for the night, Adana whispered a quiet thank you to Emeka. His love had been the foundation upon which she had built this new life. And though he was gone, his spirit lived on in the laughter of their grandchildren, in the prosperity of the village, and in the hearts of all those whose lives they had touched. And so, as Adana closed her eyes that night, she did so with a heart full of gratitude and peace, knowing that she had not just survived, but had truly lived, turning tragedy into triumph and leaving behind a legacy of love, justice, and hope that would continue to inspire the generations to come. The end. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to click on the subscribe button and follow us for more. Bye bye.